Now, usually I ask most people to say, what do you see in the center of this object? The sun. When I was in school, I was not taught that the ancients knew the sun was in the center of the solar system. I was taught that humans thought that the earth was the center of everything. Until Copernicus proved it on his deathbed and got published, and then Galileo got sent to house imprisonment for proving that objects move around other bodies. Here's a depiction, older than any history, that shows the sun in the center. Other things you see, this is a six-pointed star, which is usually called the Star of David. When I was a child and I used to draw the sun, I used to draw rays coming off the sun. It's very childlike, yet it has information that should not exist. Now there's 12 objects here, and I'll tell you again, here's that number 12. Why is there 12 objects? They used to represent every god with an astronomical object. So we have the Earth and the Moon, because gods were represented by the Moon and the Earth. Mercury and Venus. Now again, remember, we're not going to scale. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Jupiter here, Mars here, and an extra planet here. Now what we have here now is the asteroid belt. So between Mars and Jupiter is the asteroid belt now, but this depiction is showing that there's a planet there. So we think that this is the original orbital path of Nibiru, that extra planet that their gods said they came from. And now there's debris left in that orbital path. So once again, now Pluto was not even discovered in the 1930s. Uranus and Neptune were discovered in the 1840s to 1870s. And this is showing every object in the solar system that we know of today, 4,500 years ago. And again, this is type 1 data. Any of you can go to the Pergamon Museum in Germany and see it for yourself and try to figure it out. Is this true or not? Well, I know the piece exists. Here's a picture of it. But many people, if you're going to take a trip, go see it for yourself. That's the type of data we're looking at, stuff that anybody can examine for themselves. Zacharias had an argument with an astronomer regarding the definition and the description of this piece here. And this astronomer first said in a magazine, oh, it's not showing our solar system, he's depicting another solar system. And Zachariah wrote on the caption, he goes, wow, is he saying that the ancients now knew about other solar systems out beyond our own? Our modern astronomers have only discovered other solar systems in the last 2 to 3 decades, even though they theorized they existed. So then the astronomer said, okay, I was too hasty. Maybe it's showing Jupiter in the constellation of the Teapot. Well, the Teapot is a constellation that was created by British astronomers because they used to have afternoon tea. The Teapot was never discovered by Mesopotamian or Akkadian astronomers. And so he said, okay, that probably is not right either. And Jupiter never is in the Teapot. The observation doesn't exist. They're in the wrong lineup. So the only final explanation is very simple. Now, I'm not saying that every citizen of Sumeria or Akkadian Empire knew what this information was, but 2 did. One, potentially a god with a small g, an alien or a godlike being, and then the scribe who was told by the god what to put into the picture or what the knowledge was. This was not public knowledge that everyone knew. This was stuff that the high priest knew. This was the sacred knowledge. This was the secret stuff. And now we go to what I consider one of the most important pieces on planet Earth. This is in the British Museum. It's in a permanent display. This is called the planisphere. Now we're going to look at a sketch in a second. This is a round disc with a lot of different things going on. We'll see the sketch and it'll be clear, but I just want to point out this. This here looks like it's been bubbled or melted. This here is like really smooth, and none of it shows burn marks. So the piece is in a very strange condition nowadays. Okay, notice this cuneiform, you're going to see it right here. This is Zachariah's sketch, which is in his book, The 12th Planet, and other books. Now we're going to talk about what are in the individual pieces here. First of all, this shows the shape of an ellipse. An ellipse is not a circle. An ellipse is the true path of planets around the sun. Kepler was the one who discovered the true orbital path. An ellipse has double foci. There's two focuses of gravity that pull at it, and that's shown here. This shape should not exist. Here we have what looks like Orion, and here we have an arrow pointing here. Here we have 3 intersecting lines, and we have an arrow pointing here. And here, we're going to actually look at this whole slice, but let me talk about this and this. to navigate in space, to navigate in a three-dimensional space condition, you need 7 points, 7 coordinates. You need a starting point. Let's say me here. I'm here. I want to go there. How do I get there? I have to connect one star here, draw a line. I make a star here, make another line. I connect another 2. I have 6 coordinates, and I draw 3 intersecting lines. So for me going to there, I need to have 7 coordinates. 6 there and 1 here. Or I'm coming from there and going here, which just reverses it. And that's what you're showing, that's what's being displayed here on a 2-dimensional surface. They are showing 3-dimensional space travel. Here's one section, and this here, section here, and more descriptors, and they're intersecting the lines, and this is the originating point, or that's the destination point. They're showing 3-dimensional navigation on a 2-dimensional surface. And this is not the only piece on Earth that's like this. Gordon Cooper, the astronaut, was on the radio with Zechariah and said that he also found evidence of this in a dig in Mexico of 3-dimensional navigation on a 2-dimensional surface. But we haven't seen that. That was held back by the Mexican authorities. So even this is a unique piece. This is on permanent display in the British Museum. And when I was there, I talked to the security guard. I go, you stand there all day long. Do you actually know what you're standing in front of? And he's like, nope, I have no idea. I'm like, you really don't. So now we're going to look at this piece of the puzzle here. This piece of the pie, is actually describing a journey from another planet to our planet here on Earth. First, you have like these directions and different things around the outside. We'll start with that. Kakab Anu. In Sumerian, Kakab is an astronomical object. In Hebrew, Kohav is star. So Kakab maintains itself, the sound, and then becomes Kohav. But they use Kakab as any astronomical object. So Kakab Anu meant some astronomical object in the heavens. And then you have some instructions here, high, rocket, pilot. Now in here you have the deity Enlil, means the god Enlil, went by the planets. And he came from, we think that this means a mountainous planet. They came this way, they made a course correction between Kakab, Dilgon, and Kakab Apin. We think it's Mars and Jupiter. So now watch how many planets he came by. Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Earth. They called Earth the 7th planet. And they depicted Earth with 7 dots. For many decades, the 7 dots was misinterpreted as being the Pleiades or 7 sisters. Zechariah Sitchin is the one who figured out that from the outside coming in, they would call Earth the 7th. And that's why, they did show 7 dots depicted all the time. Now over here, you see that we're the 3rd rock from the sun. The sun, Mercury, Venus, and Earth. And then you have the Way of Enlil. And the Way of Enlil is the sky of the Earth. So this is showing in a single picture a space journey from outside of our solar system, going by our planets, making a course correction, which we think is at the asteroid belt, and then landing on the 3rd planet from the sun. And then the text described a splashdown in the Persian Gulf waters, them coming out, exploring different paths, creating canals, and doing all these operations. So there's visual evidence and there's textual evidence, and the stories back it up. Now, some of you may not be able to see this over here. This is from the Tomb of Point, Egypt. This is showing what looks like a rocket, basically, a rocket with an above ground, like an Apollo module, and a below ground. First of all, there's 2 guys down here doing maintenance with hoses and doing work. This looks like technology being shown. Up here is what looks like a heat shield with straps on it, and there's marks on it, so it's not pristine, it's not shown perfect, it's depicted as something used. The people are praying around this object, but they're not praying to the object. They are focusing away from the object. So now, instead of just the knowledge of astronomy, zodiac, and mathematics, not just the knowledge of a description of traveling, now we're seeing physical depictions, visual forms of technology. Things that the ancient people recorded of what their gods were doing. It's simply what they saw, so they draw the picture. Okay? Even the giraffes here, which are unusual, are facing away. This is a holy object, and you shouldn't even look at it. Here, it looks like it is dispensation for rocket exhaust. In other words, if an underground rocket takes off, the exhaust has to go somewhere. And it looks like we have here absorbing tiles and things like this. Now, if that's what they depict, and this is what we have, okay. Obviously, it seems crazy. You know, we're talking about rocket ships, technology. These are not UFO technology. We're talking about fuel-based technology coming to Earth from another planet, which happens to be in our solar system, not from a different star system. So I was asking myself, okay, pictures is one thing, but all this evidence has also descriptions. So is there a description of this type of event? I mean, we're talking about, you know, to get out of Earth's atmosphere, you need to have escape velocity, 6 miles a second. You have to fly, you have to travel. I mean, it's huge amounts of thrust and force. Okay? Did somebody record some type of event that can match this depiction? The answer is actually yes. We have a description in text form from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the oldest literary tale we have complete evidence for. 16 tablets big, found in multiple cultures, copied almost exactly word for word. And here's what Gilgamesh saw. He thinks he's having a dream. He's talking to his friend Enkidu, his best friend. And he's saying, the heavens cried out, earth roared, daylight vanished, and darkness issued forth. Lightning flashed, fire broke out. Clouds swelled, it rained death. The glow disappeared, the fire went out, and all that had fallen turned to ashes. Now, if we were watching a rocket launch, that's exactly the description that we would give it. If we didn't understand the technology, fire and brimstone, we've heard stuff like this from the Bible, darkness, flashing, and then ashes. And it matches everything that you would see here, in order of the events occurring. So that's what's so incredible about this material, is you don't just get the depiction, you get also a textual description. And I gotta tell you something, Gilgamesh is one of the sources for so much of our biblical information. Gilgamesh was the first character in history who claimed to be a hybrid. He was two-thirds divine. His mother was a goddess, his father was a priest king. So he was the first being who was not completely human, but partially divine. Later on, besides the mythological religious stories, pharaohs of Egypt had to claim divinity from a god to be able to rule. Gilgamesh was the first. Gilgamesh will also, you'll see soon, he'll be involved in another biblical story. So again, I asked myself the question, okay, depictions of rockets, advanced mathematics, okay, they gotta land somewhere, right? And where are they taking off from? Where are they landing? Is there evidence that they physically existed on the earth? And once again, the answer is yes. This is from Baalbek, Lebanon. This is the biggest cut stone in the world. Now, when you look at pictures of pyramids and stuff, they're puny. This is 30 people standing in front of one stone. It's the size of this room. And this stone is in Baalbek, Lebanon. It's always existed there. Throughout history, Baalbek has been there. There's never been a time, there's actually no stories of them building Baalbek. The locals just say the giant gods built it. Well, I gotta tell you something. Is it possible that humans will be working with stones this big? You can't even move it today. It weighs 1,100 tons. And by the way, this is 1.5 miles away from where it's put in place. This is the quarry. And the site that exists in the Baalbek temple, it's actually up here. And then here's a guy over here. Look how small he is, right? That giant stone, there's 3 of them called the trilithon. Up here, the 3rd level up. Now this stone's maybe humans would deal with this size. Possibly. These are even bigger. This is 3 of those gigantic stones that 30 people in front of, weigh 1,100 tons. Even today, we can't move it around. We can just lift it up and lift it down. But it's still there, halfway cut into the ground in perfect shape and perfect form. So now we have sort of an explanation of it coalesces into the different types of evidence. The textual, the visual, the memory, the description, and an old Phoenician coin, which we think this is showing what that Baalbek site looked like with its actual rocket ship still standing on the platform. This is a raised platform. And in this site was where, in Baalbek, Lebanon, by the way, nobody can go there now because there's a terrorist base from Hezbollah there now. Zechariah was able to get a trip there like last decade in the 90s when there was a peace treaty for a short time. But the Romans built the biggest temple that they had to Jupiter. The temple was to Jupiter. The biggest temple in their empire was built on that site. And what the Romans did was they adopted ancient sites that were popular. They took them over, and they built their stuff on it. And that one in Baalbek was the biggest one that they ever built. Okay, it may be hard for some people to see this, but, oh boy, yeah, it's a little difficult. Okay, what you're looking at is now the pictograph of the word Dingir. And Dingir means holy ones of the gear. This little gear object. This actually looks like a two-stage rocket ship sideways. The problem is that that's the first time that the word God was mistranslated. Dingir, the word din is like mujahideen, holy warrior, or in Hebrew, Beit Din, which means house of judgment or justice. So what you're seeing is the first time that the word for God appeared in pictographic writing, it looked like a two-stage rocket, and the next time it was translated was wrong. It was translated incorrectly. Now, the word gear here at the bottom means flashy, fiery lightning. So that word for God actually meant holy ones of the flashy, fiery object. Now I'm going to go a little bit quickly here. This was a little rocket ship object that was found in Turkey 15 feet beneath the ground that Zechariah was instrumental in getting the curator of the museum to have put out on display because it was found in his drawer and the guy thought it was a fake, even though they were the ones who dug it up. This is the sketch of what this is, and Zach also shows a little space shuttle by it. So what happens is, since the curator could not find anything that was like that, he thought, oh, how could my museum put up an original? That doesn't make sense. So he convinced him by sending the curator other objects that look similar to display this. And they do display this in the Turkey Museum, and they have a little note that we think it's a fake. A fake that was found 15 feet below the ground because, of course, he couldn't believe that anything that was space-related existed in ancient times. And this is how some of the word progressions occurred. The word Dengir meant holy ones, righteous ones of the gear. There was two types of gods of the Sumerians. They called them Anunnaki, which meant those who that to heaven and earth came, and Igigi is watchers. These will appear in Hebrew later on, and you're going to see the next slide. Dingir shows up as a mistranslation the next time it's generated into Elul, Ilani, and Aluti, which means lofty ones or gods. So the first time this pictograph is translated, it's mistranslated. Then it turns into Hebrew as El, Eloha, Elohim, Elohim being a plural word. And then in the Bible you have words that are B'nai Elohim, which are children of the gods. So the Dingir pictograph of a two-stage rocket becomes the original form of the word gods. I know I'm going quick, but on the video you can see it very in detail. The word Anunnaki, those who from heaven and earth came. Enki was the chief, that's one of the Anunnaki. Hebrew picks up the word Anunnaki, changes it to Anak, Anaki, or Anakim, which means giant. So Hebrew's word for giant, Anakim, is from the sound of the Sumerian name for their gods. Now the word term for fallen angels or fallen ones is what Anunnaki means, those who have fallen down. Hebrew picks that up as the word Nephilim, fallen ones. In Aramaic, Nephila is also giant, the word for giant, which is also why there was mistranslated for many years. There were giants in the earth in those days. And Rephaim is a term of a type of giant mentioned in the Bible. That's the word for ghost right now in Hebrew. So Hebrew picks up two different types of the word of Anunnaki. One is the sound, and one is the meaning. Fallen ones for them is Nephilim, and the sound remains Anak, Anakim. Forget about the vowels, just think about the consonants. For thousands of years, Anunnaki becomes and gets changed into Anakim. That's how accents change. And over thousands of years of repeating these stories, this is how the knowledge is transferred down. Okay, if you can see this, this is showing their creation story of the first time the human was created, us. What's happening is actually you're looking at a laboratory scene. Notice, now we know this is Enki from the textual description. He's holding a test tube. On the wall is flasks, and here's a guy mixing this mixture, which is what they said how we were created, with a mixture of clay and blood and other things that happen, which, by the way, is the same as the biblical story. Okay? God formed us from the dust of the ground, which is, in Hebrew, all of those words come from the term for man. It's hard to explain in a quick form, but here. And here, Ninti, the goddess of life, who also was later translated as Rib and life, were mistranslated. This is why Rib ends up in the Bible. The woman comes from Adam. She's holding up the first baby, the first model man, and in the text it says, "My hands have made it, I have created it." Now, I didn't bring the text in, but I wanted to show you how, look at the laboratory scene this is. This test tube here, this is like a modern, it's a simple, sketch drawing, but of a laboratory. And it's extremely old. Okay, here we are in the first biblical passage we have. I hope we can get through these. This is after the flood. After the flood that Noah had, and the whole flood destroyed the earth and everything, animals, Noah took all the animals. Noah gives a sacrifice to God. And it says here that God, so this just says the word Hashem. In this Bible, they don't use the word God, which would be Yahweh. They use Hashem, which means the name. So God smelled the pleasing aroma. And he enjoyed the smell of the sacrifice being cooked, which doesn't seem to make sense for the biblical creator God. But when you know where the original form of the story came from, you can see. This is from Atrahasis. Atrahasis is the same as Noah, the character who survived the flood. He's known by many names. Over here, the gods smelt the fragrance, gathered like flies over the offering, and they had eaten the offering. So in the older form of the story of the survival of the flood, it wasn't the God of the Bible who smelled the sacrifice or gave the order to build the ark or to actually create the flood. In this case, it was the gods Enlil and those group of gods. Along with that, there's more details that show up. In this story, the gods are weeping for the humans that were dying. They were not happy. They were above the ground, seeing what was going on. They were thirsty. They were filled with grief. They had dry lips. They didn't have enough supplies. And for 7 days, the flood came upon. Also, the story is in Gilgamesh. So Gilgamesh and Atrahasis. Gilgamesh, the character that he meets, is called Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim is also the character of Noah, who was told to build an ark and to save his family and save the animals. And again, the gods smelt the fragrance, the gods smelt the pleasing fragrance, and gathered like flies over the offering. Here, the story of the dove is released first, then there's a swallow and then the raven in the biblical story. The dove is the last bird to go out, who doesn't come back until they know there's dry waters. So it's easy to see where the story of Noah was borrowed from. You can find the originals. And here's the Tower of Babel story, another one that's borrowed, okay? When they migrated from the east, they found the land in the valley land of Shinar, which is Sumer. They said, let us break bricks, burn fire, let us build a tower with its top to heaven. And what happens is, the land is with one language, and God says, come, let us descend and confuse their language, they should not understand one another's language. There's a lot of details in here, but I want to show you the copy of where it comes from. The Sumerian originals here, this is from Samuel Noah Kramer's book again. It says here, Harmony Tongue Sumer, the great land of the bee. Harmony Tongue means the land of one language. So here we have another example of the Tower of Babel story, which borrowed. To Enlil in one tongue gave speech. In their history, Enlil gave language, not the God of the Bible, Yahweh. And down here, change the speech in their mouths, put contentions into it, into the speech of man, and until that time had been one language. So down here, we have an example of the Sumerian original in the Tower of Babel. Okay, here's the birth story of Moses. The birth story of Moses is also borrowed. Moses was not the first character in history to be put in a basket, covered with pitch, left to float in a river, and found to be and raised to be the king. That was Sargon, the great king of Acadia. And that's the birth story. I know I'm going fast here, but I have to go through these. Okay, here's the first plague of Egypt. Aaron and Moses turned the rivers to blood. They could drink nothing but blood, and everything was turned, the whole Nile River was turned to blood. Guess what? It's not an original biblical story. Once again, it's Inanna Ishtar. All the wells of the land she filled with blood, all the groves and gardens of the land she filled with blood. That people could drink nothing but blood. Inanna Ishtar turned the river to blood before the biblical did too. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls, from the Book of Giants. The Dead Sea Scrolls is 150 BC to about 70 AD. And there's Gilgamesh mentioned in here. Now, Gilgamesh is from 2500 BC to 3500 BC. It's thousands of years earlier. And here, the Dead Sea Scrolls has got Gilgamesh mentioned. And this should not exist. In fact, when the first version of the Dead Sea Scrolls was released, they didn't even release this fragment. This was released in the second version. The complete Dead Sea Scrolls was not even complete. So now we see a form of the Sumerian story, Gilgamesh, the hero king, showing up in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which, by the way, Dead Sea Scrolls is one of those examples of how the modern version of the Bible we have is the current version at least to 2,000 years ago. Here's the Hebrew months that the Jews use today, borrowed from Babylon. In the Bible, all the months are labeled. The first month, the seventh month, etc. They picked up all the months. Nisan became Nisan. Sivan was Sivan. So when the Jews came back the Israelites came back from exile, they picked up the Babylonian months and a whole bunch of these other stories which were eventually incorporated into the Bible. Okay. All right. I've never done a 1-hour lecture before. It usually takes me 2 hours and 10 minutes to do the full material. Okay, this is some of Zechariah's books. There's a lot of them. Bottom line stories here. The stories of the Bible are borrowed. The mythological stories, borrowed. Literary borrowing has been going on for thousands of years. That doesn't destroy or reduce the foundation of the messages of the Bible, the moral lessons, the good ideas, the ways of living your life, honoring your father and mother, treating your brother as yourself, honoring the planet, taking care of people that need it. It just shows you that the original form of, if the belief is based on the stories, there's a problem there. If the belief and the way of living your life is based on the good ideals, then you have no problem.